question was, do I know how many ancient heiaus there are on this island? And if so, would there be the same amount on the other islands? First of all, we have to qualify the question. Do you mean sites that are still visible today? Both, huh? Okay. Here's the problem, you see. Oh, heiau, okay, that's a good, I apologize for that. We take some of these words for granted now so often. Heiau is a word in Hawaiian that is usually translated as temple. Okay? And it's usually thought of as a sacred site, but that's not truly correct. Special site, yes. But from a Hawaiian point of view, every square inch of the islands and the air above and the sea around are sacred. Okay? So these are not the only sacred sites. But they are considered special because they were places that were placed according to the best energy arrangements for particular purposes. Now, the reason I said translated as temple, yes, it was a place where prayers were done, but then the old Hawaiians prayed all the time for everything. From the time they got up in the morning till the time they went to bed at night, most of them. So it wasn't just a place for prayer. It was a place for teaching. It was a place for learning. Some of the heiau were places like where people would learn navigation, or they would learn healing of various kinds, or they would learn masonry, or all different kinds of stuff. The heiau were places for teaching and learning as well, and they were places for celebration and special rituals. Okay. We have to back this up with a little history. There was a major religion. Now, Hawaii did not have just one religion. People will say, what was the Hawaiian religion like? Well, which one? There were a lot of them. But there was one major one. And this major one was something like the relationship between the church and the aristocracy in old Europe. Very similar in a lot of ways. This was a feudal society when Cook stumbled onto it in 1778. Okay? And had a lot of the same structure as the feudal society in Europe. And this major religion had become very, very oppressive and very restrictive, so much that even the nobility were feeling too constrained, especially after the contact with the West. So in the year 1819, two very important things happened. One, the Kamehameha the Great, who was the man who had finally united all of the islands under one rule, he died. And later that year, his son, instigated by his mother, made a declaration that the old kapus of this religion were done away with. The equivalent of tearing down the church, saying no more. And so there was a little battle that was fought, not so much little, but there was a battle that was fought about that. And the reformers, let's call them, won. And so the priests were kicked out of all the temples. Not just the one religion, but virtually all of them, all except the Pele clan. They were able to hold on to theirs. But the one that dealt with the goddess of the volcano on the Big Island. And in fact, they have never stopped. But the others were kicked out. The temples were overrun. The images were torn down, used for firewood, given away. The stones were used for building other structures. And then later on when the land changes came, these temples were not thought of as important by anybody, not even the Hawaiians at that time. And so people were free to take away stones and build corrals. Some of the temples, the Queen of Kauai used one of the major temples as a corral for her livestock. That's Poliahu, by the way. So they went into disrepair and many of them disappeared. So for a lot of them, we have no record at all. we can look at the kind of sites that temples were built on and be pretty certain that there were temples there at one time. But there are no physical traces anymore. Okay. So, bringing us back into the present then, this is a period of Renaissance, and these heiau have become more important culturally now for the Hawaiians. And for some Hawaiians who are even going back to some of the best parts of the old ways, they are becoming religiously or spiritually important. So they are, in Western terms, considered sacred spaces that have to be treated with respect. Right? Which means, I'll just throw this in, if you go and visit some, do not climb on the walls. That's highly disrespectful. And do not take any stones, even the tiniest one, away from the walls or the interior. Okay? If you want to pay proper respect. How many are there? We finally get to that. The best source, there is a book put out by the Bishop Museum, which is on Oahu. And it is a book from the 1800s where a man made a survey. And this book contains the drawings and information about all the sites that were still available at that time, most of which some traces can be found still today. Not all of them, but most of them. So that would be your best resource to get a close number. But, and then of course the problem is that there are some heiaus not in that book because he didn't know or wasn't told where all of them were. He mainly did the ones on the exterior. He did not visit any of the ones in the interior. And I've been to heiaus that are not in that book or on any maps. So, you know, they're on private land, and trespassing is not encouraged. Okay? But I know personally of ones that are visitable, and even one on private land that people visit anyway, and they don't say too much about it. But here on the North Shore, places and sites where you could visit would be Ke'e, of course, where there are 2 heiau on them. There are heiau sites in the Kalalau Valley, at least 3 that are pretty easy to reach. There are heiau sites all along the islands. You probably could find easily enough 25 sites today. That doesn't mean that's all there is, but you could probably, if you really wanted to look, find at least that many on the whole island. Right? But this was the 4th largest of the big islands, of the larger islands, okay? So on Oahu, there's going to be a lot more. On Molokai, which is a smaller place, you'll find many, many more sites, because they specialize in all kinds of different trainings, and on almost every ridge of Molokai, they had a temple, okay? So, dozens probably over there, at least, okay? And then many, many on the Big Island. You have heiaus on Maui all over the place, including in Haleakala, and in some of the craters in Haleakala that not many people know about. Okay? Try and give you an accurate number. No, I really couldn't do that. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of sites left. I mentioned a couple here as long as you're on Kauai. I mentioned Ke'e. I'll mention, in Kalalau I mentioned, actually in Princeville, at the hotel, where they have the little, in the little plateau where there was an an old Russian fort that was built on a heiau site. Okay. Po'oku, which is by the stables on the way to Princeville. On the left, it's a hill. There's nothing there physically, but it was a 2-acre temple at one time. Okay. So the site still has a lot of energy.
You know what that was used for, excuse me?
What Po'oku was used for? Nobody has that information to my knowledge anymore. Because there's no... Usually when they try to figure out what it was used for, they look at what's left of the structure. And even that's a guess. Unless there's a local tradition. To my knowledge, there's no local tradition about Po'oku. So really anything else would be guessing. You could go there and tune in, and maybe you'd discover something that way. Okay? And then as we get further down, there were a number of them in Anahola. There were heiaus throughout Kilauea. There's Kapinau, which everybody knows of, the butterfly. Well, everybody who lives here, mostly who's interested, knows about. A good one to visit is Poliahu in Kapa'a, because a lot of the walls are still standing there. It's up by the waterfall that some people call Opeka, which is really Opaeka'a, which is tumbling shrimp, is what that means. And Poliahu was a very, very special heiau in the past. It has a plaque on it by a former governor that says it was made by Menehunis, so we know that's true. Okay? But that's one of the most visible ones. Okay? Well worth a visit up there. And there's a lot of good information plaques around it. There's an organization that takes care of it now, and they have put some nice information plaques around it. So that's a good one that you can visit. And then those are the most visible ones for those of you who are interested.